What if the AI model you trusted to review your contract completely missed the clause that could cost you $10,000? That is not a hypothetical. I ran a real AI contract review test across 5 major models, and only one of them caught the dangerous clause. Here is exactly what happened. AI contract review is one of the fastest growing use cases for large language models right now. Freelancers, startup founders, and small business owners are all turning to AI instead of spending hundreds of dollars on a lawyer every time a new agreement lands in their inbox. That shift is understandable. But it comes with real risk if the tool you are using is not actually reliable. To run this test fairly, I needed a real contract with a real problem inside it. I used a software vendor agreement that I had encountered in my own work. It was 12 pages long, written in standard legal language, and it looked perfectly normal on a first read. That is exactly the kind of document that trips people up. There were 2 issues hidden in this contract. The first was an auto-renewal clause on page 4 that required written cancellation notice 90 days before the renewal date, or you were locked in for another full year. The second was a liability cap that limited the vendor's responsibility to 1 month of subscription fees, no matter what went wrong. Both clauses were written in dense, passive language designed to be easy to skim past. I gave all 5 AI models the same document and the same instruction: review this contract and flag any clauses that could be financially harmful to me as the buyer. No other context. No hints. I wanted to see what each model would surface on its own before I started asking follow-up questions. The first model returned a well-formatted summary. It pulled out the payment terms, the governing law section, and the termination clause. It told me the contract looked standard. It did not mention the auto-renewal window. It did not mention the liability cap. If I had signed based on that summary, I would have been walking into both traps completely unaware. The second model was more thorough in tone. It used phrases like potential concern and you may want to review. It did flag the termination section but described the 90-day notice window as a standard requirement. It called the liability cap reasonable for a software agreement. That is a much more dangerous output than a simple miss, because it actively reassured me that the problem clauses were fine. The third and fourth models fell into similar patterns. Both identified the obvious elements of the contract. Both produced readable summaries. Neither one treated the 90-day auto-renewal notice as an unusual risk. One of them actually buried its mention of the liability cap in a section labeled Standard Boilerplate. At this point I had tested 4 models and every single one had either missed or minimized the 2 most important clauses in the document. Then came the 5th model. The output started the same way as the others, with payment terms and governing law. But then it did something different. Under a section it labeled High Priority Flags, it pulled out the auto-renewal clause and explained exactly what the 90-day requirement meant in practical terms. It calculated that if I signed in January, I would need to cancel by October 2 to avoid being charged for the following year. It told me the window was unusually long compared to industry norms. The same model then addressed the liability cap directly. It did not call it standard. It noted that limiting vendor liability to 1 month of fees while the buyer remained fully liable for their own damages created a significant imbalance. It specifically flagged that this structure was problematic in agreements where data loss or service outages were possible. That is the kind of analysis that can actually protect someone. Why did 4 models fail and 1 succeed? Part of the answer is training data and fine-tuning. Models that are specifically trained on legal documents tend to have a better internal sense of what counts as unusual versus what is genuinely standard market practice. A clause that appears in 30% of contracts is not the same as a clause that appears in 90% of contracts, and that distinction matters enormously in risk assessment. Another reason is how these models are optimized. Some models are tuned to be agreeable and to produce responses that feel complete and reassuring. That is great for general productivity tasks. But in contract review, a model that smooths over friction is actively dangerous. You want a model that is calibrated to raise its hand and say this does not look right. Prompting also plays a major role. When I went back and gave each of the 4 weaker models a more specific prompt, asking them to identify clauses where the buyer bears more risk than the vendor, the results improved significantly. 2 of the 4 models found the liability cap when asked that way. 1 found the auto-renewal clause. None of them reached the level of the 5th model with default prompting, but better prompting closed some of the gap. Here is the prompt structure that got the best results across models. Start by telling the AI your role. You are the buyer reviewing this agreement before signing. Then ask it to list every clause where your obligations, liabilities, or exposure are greater than the other parties. Then ask it separately to flag any time-sensitive requirements, including notice periods, deadlines, or renewal windows. Running those 2 passes catches far more than a single open-ended review request. One thing all 5 models struggled with was context. None of them knew the specific industry I was in, the size of my business, or how mission-critical this software would be. A liability cap of 1 month of fees means something very different to a solo freelancer than it does to a company running critical operations on the platform. AI contract review gives you a baseline, but it cannot replace knowing your own risk tolerance. There is also a consistency problem worth naming. I ran the same document through the winning model 3 separate times with identical prompts. The high priority flags section appeared in all 3 outputs, but the specific language and the level of detail varied each time. If you are relying on AI contract review for anything significant, run the document more than once and look for what consistently surfaces across multiple passes. Here is what this test does not mean. It does not mean AI contract review is useless. For a routine non-disclosure agreement, a simple service contract, or a standard freelance agreement, a well-prompted AI model can catch most issues faster than most people can read the document carefully. The gap between AI and a human lawyer narrows significantly on simpler documents. The risk is assuming that gap stays narrow when the document gets complex. The practical takeaway is this. If you are going to use AI for contract review, pick the model with the best track record on legal documents, not just the most popular general-purpose model. Use specific prompts that force the model to look for imbalance, not just summarize. Run the review more than once. And for any contract above a few $100s in annual value, treat the AI output as a first pass, not a final answer. The auto-renewal clause in the contract I tested would have locked me into another 12 months of fees with no option to exit. The liability cap would have meant that if the vendor's software failed and caused data loss, my only recovery would have been $30, the equivalent of 1 month of fees. Together, those 2 clauses represented a significant financial exposure. 1 model caught both. 4 did not. That gap is the whole story. If you found this test useful, hit the like button because it genuinely helps more people find this kind of content. Subscribe if you want to see more real-world AI comparisons like this one. Next video I am testing AI models on a different high-stakes task, spotting errors in financial projections before they go to investors. You will want to see those results.